Amazing. In addition to being so excited to meet all of you and be here and enjoy in all that EXP Con 2023 in Vegas has to offer, I'm thrilled to introduce our next speaker. He's a tech entrepreneur, global business advisor, speaker, and mentor with broad experience in online real estate, which is so close to my heart. Please put your hands together and give the warmest EXP Realty welcome for Mike Delprete.
Hey everyone, how's it going? If I haven't met you yet, my name is Mike Delprete. I'm super excited to be here. All right, you ready? I got 20 minutes and 72 slides. It's going to be awesome. The industry is changing really fast right now, and what's happened for the past couple of years, we've had this. A rising tide lifts all boats. That was the slide that was up there. What's interesting about a rising tide lifting all boats, and the frustrating thing about it, is you can't necessarily tell the winners from the losers. So this reminds me of this great Warren Buffett quote, only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. And that's what's happening. Right now, we can see who's swimming naked, because we are absolutely moving from a rising tide to a receding tide. We're going from residential real estate transactions being up 18% in 2021 to being down 20% so far this year. So we're moving from this, a rising tide, to this, a receding tide. Now I love the receding tide. You know why? Because the receding tide reveals. This receding tide shows us sustainable business models. It reveals actual product market fit, and it reveals a company's true intentions. So this is super exciting time for someone like me to see what's going on in this space. This is, in terms of companies' intentions, this is from Compass's investor presentations, and you can see they very clearly highlight how they are reducing the percent of commissions they're paying out over time. This is like the first thing they talk about in the investor presentations, that over time, they're, on average, keeping back more and more of an agent's commission. Imagine if Glenn came out here and started off today like that. And to be clear, they're no dummies, right? They don't start out agent presentations like that. This is going to investors. But what's good for investors is not necessarily what's good for agents. Thanks, Jason. Which revealed an interesting point. When I started looking at the data, there's a bunch of companies out there. In terms of the revenue that they're paying out to their agents as a percentage, there's really two classes. There's these low-fee cloud-based models like EXP that are drastically paying out more and more and more of the revenue to agents. And then there's the legacy brokerages, companies like Compass, Anywhere, Douglas Elliman, that are paying out much less of their commission to agents. Now, these low-fee brokerages, again, EXP is one of those are the same, these 5 companies right here, these are the same companies that grew their agent count. What a surprise. Agents want to keep more of their commission. They're moving to companies where they get to keep more of their commission. But they're the only ones that are growing, right? The other companies up here are losing agents over time. Well, guess what? These same 5 companies are the only brokerages that are growing transaction count. So between 2021 and 2022, keep in mind, the market was down 18%. That's 1.1 million fewer transactions. These 5 companies, led by EXP, grew their transaction count. These 5 companies added 75,000 transactions in a down market, while as the big legacy brokerages, they lost more than double that. Winners and losers, winners and losers. So this got me thinking about the market. Is this a Blockbuster versus Netflix moment? Like, what does that actually mean? When I say Blockbuster versus Netflix, what does that mean? A couple things come to mind. So first, it means one business model is overtaken by another business model. And that new business model is powered by some sort of unfair advantage that the incumbents can't replicate. And what that causes is an irreversible evolution in the way business is done. So what would a Blockbuster versus Netflix moment look like in real estate? Here's what I might offer. You'd have incumbents with flat growth, so old legacy brokerage business models not growing. They would have high fixed costs, and they'd have a limited ability to change. And then the disruptors, they would have an easy to define unfair advantage, and they'd be exponentially gaining market share. So let's dive in. Let's take a look. Let's start with the first one, incumbents having flat growth. Over the past 5 years, here's some of the biggest incumbents and the growth. Home Services of America, Anywhere, Keller Williams, Redfin, some of the largest traditional real estate brokerages, all with relatively flat growth. Here's another way to look at that, right? Up and down over every year, rising tide with the market in 2021, receding tide in 2022, but fundamentally those lines are much more horizontal than they are vertical. All right, so we've got incumbents with flat growth. What's next? High fixed costs and a limited ability to evolve. Well, here's the operating expenses for the first half of this year of some brokerages. You notice Anywhere and Compass, the big legacy brokerages, with really high expenses. Nearly $1 billion, $500 million. It's 3 to 6 times higher than EXP. Very, very high operating expenses. And then the next point, limited ability to evolve. In this industry, you're either a cruise ship or a canoe. You can't be both. A cruise ship does one thing. A canoe can do a lot of different things. It can go a lot of different places. You can't turn from one to the other, and you can't be both. It's very difficult to change if you're a big incumbent, if you're a big cruise ship. So let's move on to the analogy. The disruptors, all right, they would have an easy to define unfair advantage. What does that look like in this space? I'll just go back to the operating expenses, right? If we look at operating expenses per transaction, so not just the total number, but per transaction, pretty big difference. This is an unfair advantage. EXP operating expenses per transaction is 1/10 of the incumbents. And EXP is doing twice as many transactions. It's huge, and it's hard to ignore. And what companies like EXP are doing with those savings, they're paying it back out to agents. That's why these companies are able to pay more commission dollars to agents. And there's this interesting, there's this interesting thought that if you have lower operating expenses, you have lower support. Do you guys feel like you have lower support at EXP? No. All right, I'm doing research, thank you. But there's the thought, right? So you can look at the average agent productivity at the legacy brokerages versus these low-cost models, the averages, right? And it's a bit of a myth, but this is what it is. The first half of the year, 6 months of the year, all agents, the legacy brokers, 2.45 average number of transactions per agent compared to 2.2 at the low-fee brokerages. That's about a 10% difference. It's close to, but not statistically insignificant. But it's about the same. Don't get too excited here, but EXP is actually higher than that, 2.54 average number of transactions. I'm not saying EXP is the most productive brokerage out there based on this statistic, but this myth that, if you have low expenses, you have low support, agents are just not as productive. It's not true. The data does not support that. The evidence does not back that up. Oh, and by the way, remember this business model has 1/10 of the operating expense per transaction. If you're a business owner, I know which business I would want to be part of. All right, keeping with the Netflix versus Blockbuster thing, the next point, disruptors would be exponentially gaining market share. So let's go back to this chart that I had. The incumbents, relatively flat. Let's throw on some disruptors. That's exponentially growth. 16 times for EXP over the past 5 years. Just to put that into perspective, that's like going from a salary of $50,000 to $800K. that's moving from a 600 square foot studio to a 9,600 square foot mansion. Or in the case of this brokerage, going from 25,000 transactions to just about 400,000 transactions. That is exponential growth. And looking at it another way, if we go back up to those lines, you can see that exponential growth curve in the case of EXP. And Compass has also grown too, but you see what's happened over the past year. In a down market, Compass it's the receding tide has gone down, where EXP continuously is still going up.
That's impressive.
Now, all of this leads to a fundamental business model advantage. And it comes down to profitability. So if we look at adjusted EBITDA, and I'll talk more about this in a few slides, don't worry. But if we look at adjusted EBITDA as a profitability metric, we have these low fee models, including EXP, are profitable, whereas the legacy brokerages are unprofitable, massively unprofitable. If you look at net income for the first half of the year, it's the exact same trend. The low fee models are profitable or close to it, whereas the incumbents are very unprofitable. And then one more way to look at this is not a dollar figure, but a percent, looking at the margin, because that'll equalize for scale. You look at the net income margins, every company's unprofitable except EXP. I'm not picking and choosing stats to make EXP look good. I know you should play to your audience, but like, this is the reality. These are the numbers. You can't fake this stuff. You can't make it up. I'm just holding a mirror up, and it just so happens that EXP keeps coming out on top of the charts, which makes it really interesting to me, because we are in a receding tide. Things are changing. I like looking at the outliers, and this business is an outlier. I promised you I'd talk about adjusted EBITDA. There's a lot of different profitability metrics. This is the best way, the best chart I've found to describe this concept. You start with adjusted EBITDA, and then you go down to EBITDA, and then you get net income. There's no right way to do this. They're just different financial metrics. And the point here is just look at it eyes wide open. When a company says they are, air quotes, profitable, look at what metric they're using and figure out how they're defining profitability. Because if you go back to 2022 and you look at the adjusted EBITDA of a lot of big companies in this space, disruptors and incumbents, it's a mixed bag. You've got some profit, some unprofitable businesses. But when you throw that all the way over to the right on a net income level, I love the funds going up. Everybody's losing money to the tune of $2.5 billion. And by the way, net income, that's GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. That's what the SEC, like the federal government, mandates companies report. So by very definition, that's apples to apples. Adjusted EBITDA, companies can adjust it in whatever way they see fit. $2.5 billion. You notice the other thing in this chart? EXP, the only one that was profitable. Stands out. Is this a blockbuster versus Netflix moment in real estate? Maybe. Or maybe it's more of an iPhone versus BlackBerry moment. Maybe that's it. I don't know. And the point is, there's no right answer to this question. And I really don't want to argue with anybody about the minutia of if this analogy fits or not. The point is that change is happening. All right? It doesn't matter if it's Netflix, Blockbuster, Apple, or BlackBerry. Change is happening, and you can't ignore it. Does anybody here like capitalism?
Yeah!
Me too. Me too. One of the things about capitalism, the public market, the stock market, I think is really interesting. I typically stop. I don't give anybody stock advice, and it's hard for me to make sense of the stock market. But what I do know is the stock market is this great aggregator of opinions, right? And a company's stock price fundamentally is a judgment call on a company's future prospects. It's not about now. It's not even about profitability. It's just, what does the future hold for this business? I think ultimately that's what a stock price is aggregating. So I wanted to look at some of the stock performance of some big companies in this space. So as a benchmark, I want to look at the NASDAQ. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to get rid of the pandemic bump, because a lot of weird stuff happened during the pandemic. So if you go back in time to say 2019, NASDAQ was around there, and then fast forward to today, it's up about 75% over the past 4 years. All right, that's our benchmark. NASDAQ up 75%. Let's look at some of these companies I've been talking about. I'll start with RE/MAX. RE/MAX, if you go back and compare its stock price today to where it was pre-pandemic, 2019, it's down about 50%. Anywhere, same thing, down about 50%. Now the more tech-enabled companies, like Redfin, it's down 50%. It went up 5 times in the midst of the pandemic, right? When everybody was crazy about everything, but it's down 50%. Opendoor, which IPO'd in the pandemic and had a 3x bump, is down about 70% from its IPO. Compass, which also IPO'd in the pandemic, is down about 75% from that pre-pandemic time. Right, the theme here is, this is future growth prospects. This is not what I think, this is not what you think. This is what every single investor, from a large hedge fund to an individual, thinks about the future prospects of this company. So all these traditional real estate companies are down. Starts changing a little bit with Zillow. Zillow's up about 10% after a big 5x increase. I think that in the middle, it looks like they're giving a middle finger to the market, which is really on brand for Zillow. but they're up about 10%. And then there's EXP. EXP's up 200%. This is a huge bump during the pandemic, right? Rise and fall, but compared to before then, massive gain. So again, this isn't stock advice or anything like that. I don't own any of these stocks, but it's an interesting corollary. I'm a data guy. I'm looking for data. I'm looking for evidence, like what's out there to provide some sort of perspective on what's going on in the industry. This is really interesting, and this data comes from everything, right? All these investors in this space, and there's a clear message that is reinforcing the same theme that I've been talking about. Who remembers the Saturday Night Live skit with Zillow? Anybody? Daniel Levy fantasizing about a mansion in North Carolina. Does anyone remember this part? When the lead gets to the agent, the RE/MAX agent, and the RE/MAX agent calls? Anybody, like, seriously, does anybody remember that one? All right, we got some yeses, thank you. I think that is the most telling sign of that skit, and if I were working at Zillow, that's what would keep me up at night, because that demonstrates, like, this last mile problem. It demonstrates this truism, this truth about the industry. Now, last mile problem is actually a concept that comes from logistics and transport. If you think about ordering something from Amazon, getting manufactured goods from a factory to a big warehouse on a boat, that's easy. Getting goods from one warehouse to regional warehouses, that's also really easy. But delivering them to your front door, that's hard. That's expensive, it's unpredictable. Is the address right? Is it the front porch, back porch? Are there dogs? All this stuff. And that's why you see these logistics companies innovating on the last mile. Amazon lockers at the grocery store, drone deliveries. This is why I picked up an IKEA order the other day from a grocery store. Like, it's weird, but it's companies trying to solve this last mile problem. Real estate has the same last mile problem. You can invest millions and generate online leads. You can throw them into the best software money can buy. You can use predictive analytics and AI to score those leads and rank them and figure out who's more likely to sell. But at the end of the day, you still need a real estate agent to pick up the phone and call somebody. Like, that's the last mile. Hold the applause. We'll get into it later. It's going to be great. And that's why some of the biggest companies in real estate are working with agents, right? That's why Zillow's Premier Agent program and Flex keep agents at the center of the transaction. That's why some of the fastest growing brokerages like EXP and Compass are recruiting agents. They're growing because they're recruiting. That's why companies like Opendoor, after years, have finally pivoted back towards agents and are saying, They're running a big marketing campaign. Like, work with us. We want to help you out. We can work with you. We're not trying to disintermediate you anymore. I bet all of these online real estate companies wish agents didn't exist and that they could go straight to consumers. I guarantee it. All right? And I bet everybody in this room wishes those companies didn't exist and you could just keep doing what you're doing without anybody trying to eat your lunch, right? But that's not how it works. And we're in this kind of equilibrium where nobody necessarily likes each other, but we're willing to work with each other to achieve a common outcome. Which has left you, the real estate agents, not as the last mile problem, but as the last mile solution. You have to be there. You are the indispensable, irreplaceable, central part of the transaction. Now you can applaud. So what can you do? How can you be a last mile solution? I've got some stuff for you, right? What can you do? First off, invest in your branding. Like, get the freshest, cleanest, best brand you can. Get the best technology money can buy. Spare no expense. Get the latest, greatest tech, AI, every buzzword. And then lastly, become a social media influencer. I'm just kidding. Don't do any of that stuff. You can do it. I'm not saying don't do it, but like, that's not the key. If you wrote that down, scratch it out. You want to be a last mile solution? Here's what I would offer. Back to basics. And I hate this phrase, but I'm using it. If somebody's going back to basics, you left it in the first place. Like, that's your problem. All right? But just between you and I, we're gonna use this. All right? Back to basics. What does that mean? Here's the 3 real ones. So you can write this down if you want. I'm not gonna have you erase it. First off, if someone calls you, call them back. I wouldn't have thought this slide would have gotten the largest response. Number 2, if someone texts you or emails you, write them back. Some of my biggest projects have come from really weird emails. Like, hey Mike, love your stuff, let's chat. Like, what? But you gotta reply back to everybody. You gotta water all the plants, right? And then third, build an actual meaningful relationship with whoever you're talking to. A prospective home buyer or home seller shouldn't feel like they're giving a disposition on a witness stand. Are you working with an agent? Have you been pre-approved? When are you looking to move? Like, build an actual relationship with them. All right? It's not about all this other fancy stuff. I don't care what technology you use. If you use Post-it notes, you write things down, you use Excel, like, that does not matter. This is what matters. Whether you call it back to basics, back to the foundation, this is what I would offer you to be the last mile solution. Do this. Keep doing this stuff. That's it, folks. Thank you.